Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Stanley CB168 8x8 AWS 632. So that's a bit of a part number there, but it's a simple part number actually. There's not a lot in the part number, but we will dissect it. First, we're going to start off with just a visual review. Obviously, your first impression might be that's a giant hinge, and that's because it is. It's also a heavy hinge, weighs about 4.5 pounds. That is 3 times the weight of a standard 4.5 by 4.5 hinge in this type of thickness, about 3 times. So when you get past 6-inch size hinges, you're going to have a soldier stacked parallel screw pattern like this on these quite massive hinges. And hinges like this, well, they're going to be used for well, generally massive doors is where you're going to use these. And in this job, yes, that is indeed the case. These doors are a few 100 pounds each, and they are about 4.5 inch thick. So this is an 8x8. That means that it's 8 inch tall. It's important to know that the height is first. It's 8 inch wide. This is an 8x8. Why is it important to know that the height is first? And that's because not every hinge is square. This could be easily 8x6. This could be 5x8. So that first dimension, it's really important to know it's the height. A door is opposite. The width is the first dimension. You need to know that the height's the first dimension. Mistakes can and do happen. And I have made them and I have fixed them. This is a CB168, which means it's a heavyweight hinge. This hinge leaf is 0.192 thick, 0.192, so it would be considered a heavyweight. There are 3 grades or weights of hinges: residential, then there's commercial, standard duty, I should say, forgive me, standard duty commercial, then heavyweight or heavyweight commercial. And that's what this hinge is dimensionally. Let's now talk about exactly where it is that we're going to use this massive hinge and talk more about why you would select it. So there are no hard and fast absolute rules when it comes to hinge selection, but I'll tell you some of the things that I think about when it comes to determining what hinge to use is most absolutely going to be questions about the door first. How heavy is it? Really important. How wide is it? Really important. Then how tall is it? Really important. After that, I'll be wanting to think about what base material does the hinge need to be. Is this coastal? You can use steel hinges, but will exposure to a salt atmosphere be something you want to think about? Should you be thinking about a brass hinge or maybe obviously a stainless hinge? Is it a fire door? If that's the case, you would never use a brass or a bronze hinge. So weight, width, and then height is important to get started with. What you need to know really quick, however, also is the thickness, and that's where this hinge comes in. These doors are literally 4.5 inch thick, and they are awfully heavy. These are custom doors going to a house of worship in South America, and absolute custom doors, absolutely custom. There will be a steel structure that will be laminated with a religious motif on both sides of the doors, and these doors are 4 foot by almost 10 foot tall, so they're really epic. And when we're thinking about what hinge to use, okay, so what is rated for the weight? Well, the CB168 in the Stanley catalog, which I'll show you, they do have a low, medium, or moderate and high frequency use, and gives you a guideline in terms of weight rating that the hinge can handle. So we're going to try to fit in that immediately. Then we're going to be thinking about how wide is the door. These doors are very wide. They're about 4 foot wide. So we're going to now start thinking about, well, how thick is the door? The thickness of the door is going to come into relation to how wide of a hinge we'll need, because we want to get the location of the screws into the center of the door as much as we can, naturally. And then that's going to help dictate the height. So if this door is 4.5 inch thick, depending on where they want the vertical axis of pivoting, you can start to see where that's going to come into play. Depending on where they're going to install that. You've got a 4.5 inch thick door. So you can look at my tape measure and see how I'm moving the tape in relationship to the vertical axis of pivoting, the vertical line that comes down through the hinge, is what you're going to want to think about. And we're going to look at the template as well. Thinking about the width of the hinge will help you think about the height of the hinge. There's a relationship between height and width. You can't necessarily get a hinge that the factory won't make, even though Stanley does a really good job at encouraging requests for hinges that aren't listed in their catalog. So we knew because of the door thickness we were going to want a wide hinge. In fact, we could have done a 10-inch wide hinge because of the thickness, and the reveal or the inset of where the door is in relationship to the wall. We want to get that vertical axis of pivoting out far enough so that the door can actually go past 90 degrees. And you'll need to think about the vertical axis of pivoting so that when your door opens, you're clearing something that's going to be inside of here. You're going to get that door out. To have a door go to 90 degrees in a house of worship, it's going to need to open more than that, would be my guess. You're going to need to move traffic in and out. So now we're thinking a very wide hinge. And what can we get a CB168 that'll be 8-inch wide? Well, the only hinge we can get is 8-inch tall, which actually works for this application because of the weight of the door. As you increase the height of the hinge becomes far more capable at carrying the load. So you're not going to find a hinge rated for 500 pounds that's just 4.5 inch tall. You might, but I doubt it. You'll need to go to a taller hinge. You're going to have more muscle that's doing the job, a lot taller hinge. And that's where the height comes in. But we were somewhat funneled into an 8-inch height. It could be that the weight would have been best served by a 6-inch hinge. Well, in 6-inch, you've got 6 wide, 5 wide, and 4.5 wide. You can't get 8 wide. You can. Actually, you can't. You don't want to go to a wide throw hinge where the hinge is wider than it is tall, because those they're not load rated at all. So you're going to want to avoid that stuff. So it was a confluence of the thickness, the width, and the width is what is served by the height. When you get wider than 3 foot on any door, you need to start thinking about a taller hinge. If you get wider than 3'6" and wider, you're going to want a 5-inch hinge in a typical application. So be mindful of how that all comes into play.
AEB supply.
Yeah. And we certainly don't want the selection of a hinge to seem any more complicated than it needs to be, but there are a lot of things to consider, and that's where experts in the field, architects, designers, they're going to rely on specifiers or people like myself who will be given an outline of a project and will be asked to produce an actual part number, because we'll be doing all the thinking on the back end about what's the right hinge. We'll be doing the communicating with the manufacturer's technical support department about what's the right hinge and making those product selections. And that was the role that I was playing in this. So what else I selected for this hinge, and it's not necessarily something that I could have chosen, but when you get into having a hinge that's heavy, that is 8x8, you're really not going to do that in the weight that I'm talking about of the door in a standard weight hinge. So we're automatically thinking about a heavyweight hinge, absolutely. A hinge that's thicker, okay? I happen to like this hinge style, which means the CB168. CB means concealed bearing. This is a bearing or friction-reduced sort of construction that doesn't have the 4 bearing packets that you'll have on a heavyweight hinge. In my opinion, that's a cleaner look than having a bearing packet at all of those knuckle intersections. I like the concealed bearing look, the CB. This is a 5-knuckle hinge. A 3-knuckle hinge probably would have been nice as well. I don't know why I didn't select a 3-knuckle hinge. I doubt it's because it's not available. Maybe it was a cost issue, I'm not really sure, but a 5-knuckle hinge is more common. But the point being is this is a friction-reduced construction, the CB168, and aesthetically, it's cleaner looking in my opinion. Okay, so let's dissect what a CB168 actually is. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so here's the item we are looking at. Not much to see here, but let's start by looking at some photographs that we have. Polished brass is always tough to photograph. By the time you're seeing this, we'll probably have some far better images. Close-up view of the logo. So this is a Stanley hinge. There was a purchase of the Stanley Hinge manufacturing division from whoever owns them by Dormakaba. Dormakaba owns Best Lock and other companies, Dorma and Kaba and Precision and others. They were permitted to use the name Stanley for 2 years. Well, that 2 years is up, and now these are rebranded as Best Hinges, which Stanley's been making hinges for 170 years. I don't know that I would have changed that. This is a cross-section of the hinge. Specifically, we're looking at the swag on the hinge leaf here. The way that a hinge is bent right here is what defines what the hinge is. I think of it as its genetic code. How you change the angle at which this is bent, you will absolutely change the type of hinge that you're dealing with. This is a full mortise hinge. This is what the swag looks like on a full mortise hinge. The backside. And then it's screw package. Now, in my part number, which we are about to dissect, I have AWS. That means all wood screws. The factory included machine screws because that's probably the standard way that they package these. I would not have included them because I know that we don't need them. I know that it's a wood door and a wood frame. As a result of that, my job is done properly when I specify the fastener type, and that's because in our industry, we don't want to have an installer try to use the wrong fastener. And in our industry, we find people that are underqualified or possess no prior experience, and they're installing or hanging doors. The inside joke is that it's the painter that installs all the, extremely expensive hardware. And by not sending the fasteners to the job to begin with, you eliminate the possibility that you'll get a call that says, the doors fell off the hinges. How is that possible? I don't know. The screw came right out. How long is the screw? It's about a 1/2 inch. Well, you used the wrong screw. That's where that starts. Well, they were in the package and my guy thought that that was the right thing to do. Well, it's not. Common sense would tell you that the wood screw is the right screw to use. Who said that common sense? You get the picture. So AWS, this should not have been, metal screws should not have been included at all. But it is, you're going to see that over and over again. The other reason that I specify AWS is because not necessarily every time will you get all wood screws. In each of these packages, there needs to be 16 wood screws. It could be typical to get all machine screws and half wood screws, but I'm specifying AWS because I want to be sure the factory sends an adequate quantity of wood screws for this application. We have wood frames and we have wood doors. So if they sent a standard package, if that meant all machine screws and half wood, my client's going to have an awful time finding number 12 by 1.25 inch threaded to the head, flathead, steel-based, brass-plated wood screws. He's not going to find that at Ace Hardware on a Saturday morning. So that's the other reason that it's correct to specify that. Now, let's dissect the part number. Let's start by doing that by looking at the cut sheet. This is linked to down below as well, absolutely. So we have CB168. And what that's going to mean is it's a concealed bearing. CB, concealed bearing. That's easy. The 1 probably means full mortise is going to be my guess. I don't know exactly. The 6 and the 8 means two things. It means heavyweight, and it means steel-based. It's made of steel, and it is 190 thousandths thick. Actually, they say that it's 0.203. This hinge is measuring about 10 thousandths of an inch light, which to be 3, 4, 5, 7 thousandths off is not uncommon. 10 thousandths, I would say, I don't see that often, and it's unusual to see that from Stanley. But it should be 0.203. I would like to have used a different base material, but such as brass, but they don't offer it, as you can see. Plus, in the table for weight of doors, it's going to be a steel-based hinge that will be there. But for looks, I would have liked to have used a solid brass hinge. Now, there's also a link to the template that's down below, which is somewhere here. We can just use this link for right now. Yeah, that's a big hinge. 8x6 and 8x8. 8 inches the height. Now, this is really handy to have. Okay, I see. So what they're giving us here is two different widths. You know, there's two different hinges here. Why is that the case? Well, one's an 8-inch wide and the other's a 6-inch wide, because this template goes both ways. I know that this top one is the 8-inch wide. This will give you everything that you want to know about the hinge. The length of the leaf, give you the diameter of the barrel, gives you the gap between the two hinges. And as we scroll down to the table, you'll get the E, F, and G part numbers, or values, I should say. Okay, 3 1/4 inch swag line, 0.847, 13 27/64. No, 27/32 is what that is. 1/16 of an inch between. 3 1/4, 1/16, 27/32 E dimension. That should tell you everything you need to know. Also, they're using a template here that's showing bearing packets. Our hinge is not like that. In fact, they are showing it that way because this template is for the FBB168, which does feature the bearing packets. It's not the concealed bearing construction that we have. Tells you the screws that you need. I said earlier that they were number 12. I was wrong. They're 14 by 1.5 inches for this size, which is a 1/4 inch. So it's a very large screw. I have some images down below that we've already looked at. We've discussed those. Okay. Now, there's a link below this video, as seen here, to the manufacturer's page. And from here is where you can pull up not only all of the Stanley products we sell by means of this horizontal navigation, but also a link to the manufacturer's website. Website. Whoopsie. Website, as well as a link to the catalog that I like. It's a 2010 architectural hardware catalog. This document's really handy, and let's just touch on the important components of this first. Okay, let's take a look at this catalog. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, here is the catalog alphabetical index. Let's scroll to something that's important. General hinge information. Every good manufacturer's hinge catalog ought to include a lot of encyclopedic information. The best do. Stanley is among them. According to me, they're at the top of my personal list. Encyclopedic knowledge. This is going to get into talking about what the different types of hinges look like. You can begin to readily identify the type of a hinge when you just see it installed. If you see a hinge that looks like that, well, that's to the trained eye, that's clearly a swing clear hinge. And if you recall how I said earlier how the swag or the bend on the hinge leaf really defines the hinge, you can see that that's the case. This is what's called a half mortise hinge. That bend on this leaf that is mounted to the face of the jamb, that's bent very differently, and it changes the hinge utterly. So different hinge types are here for your review. That weight chart I had mentioned earlier. Okay. So we know we're dealing with a door that weighs a few hundred pounds. 600 pounds, high frequency use. The CB168 8x8, that tops out at a 600 pound application. And I believe that the application is going to be within that 600 pounds. You need something heavier than that. You're dealing with a piece of detention hardware. This BB852 is a very unusual hinge. You wouldn't use it in the application that I'm using this in. It's for exceptionally heavy items, 1,000, 2,000 pound range. Steel, literally, that you'll see in detention applications, or very unusual applications where you have very heavy welded steel gates that would separate a driveway from a public street. You'll use those hinges in that regard as well. We have lots of videos on the BB852 series. You can find those. Height of hinges. This is a formula on how to determine the width of a hinge. We did a lot of thinking, talking about what's the width of the hinge. This formula is well worth, I wouldn't say committing to memory, but committing to memory where you can find the formula. Door thickness minus back set times 2 plus the clearance plus the inset will tell you the width of the hinge. You go to the next commercially available size. Door weights, fastener types, handing chart. A finish chart is here as well. Security options that can be done on hinges. These doors are outswing, but there wasn't a concern about them requiring a removable pin functionality. I believe that they're interior vestibule doors. Raised barrel hinges, wide throw hinges, electrified or power transfer hinges. BB852s, that's what they look like. They're 5 by 6. You can order those countersunk as well, but it's not a hinge that you would use in most applications. That's a slip-in hinge. That's for aluminum door and frame applications. You don't see those often, but you will if you're dealing with mid-20th century aluminum storefronts. A variety of different swing clear hinges, full, half mortise, full and half surface, olive knuckle hinges. Those are fun. You don't see those very often nowadays, but you would have in the 19th century. Decorative tips, etc. Okay, and then you'll get into the actual meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the catalog, the different hinge series that they have. Okay, let's wrap up this video on camera. So I would certainly not dissuade you from using this hinge, but I would encourage you to think about the things that we had mentioned earlier. What are the particulars that lead you to determining the hinge that you need? Again, weight, width, height, door thickness. You need to know all that stuff. All of the information on this project conspired to tell me that I was going to need a hinge that was going to be this size, and again, made of steel. Okay, that chart will allow you to see where the different hinge weights, the weight chart in terms of what type of hinge you'll use, and you won't find any brass or bronze-based material there. Really nice quality hinge. I'm always very satisfied with the fit and finish of the Stanley product, and one thing I like a lot is their logo, whether it be Best or Stanley, has always been petite. There are some manufacturers of hinges, especially those that are importers, that seem to just take up a large space of the hinge. I do not like excessive corporate advertising on my hardware. There are even manufacturers that have asked me if they can get the hinge without the logo, and it's not uncommon on the face of cylinders as well. I would agree, you don't want that. However, it is also nice to be able to look at a hinge. If you're a customer and you're calling some descendant of mine in 50 years saying, hey, I need this hinge. Okay, got any information? Well, it says Best. That's going to help a lot, because on these unusual hinges, they usually put the part number on the back, or some sort of reference code that's on there. And you won't be able to see it, but that definitely says CB168. So when we get that sort of information, we'll be able to know exactly what you have. A CB168, what it was 50 years ago, will probably be what it is 50 years from now. Best, well, you know, the proper sort of hardware archaeologist will know that used to be Stanley. And you'll say, what's the size? We'll know everything about it except the size at that point. And then we'll know exactly what we're dealing with. Any questions on this or any other Stanley product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.